Hello everybody and welcome back to our lecture series. I'm Ted, your host, and for this lecture we're going to continue right along where we last left off, examining the curious position of the heirs of Augustus. In our last lecture we looked at how Augustus he did not have a very well defined public role. Part of the masterpiece in his settlement was that his position was ambiguous, but it also inhibited his ability to rightfully or intentionally designate a successor, someone who would be grafted onto the imperial facade, onto the governing body once Augustus had died. Now, as has stated in our last lecture, Augustus initiated the third phase of Roman history, the imperial phase or the empire. He provided the model for how the empire was to function and to operate. Tiberius, his successor, kept things running smoothly. Now, the emperors of the imperial family, the Julio-Claudian family, the emperors that followed him, that followed Augustus and Tiberius, they have had their reputation tarnished by hostile sources. They are regarded as prominent examples of the madness and the wickedness, with the exception of the Emperor Claudius, who is generally seen as a very shrewd and a very capable administrator. The other members of the Julio-Claudians, they're seen as examples of madness and wickedness. Now we're going to take an overview of the imperial successors of Augustus during the first 2 centuries of the Roman Empire. The successors of Tiberius, the successor of Tiberius was a nephew of his named Gaius. Gaius is better known by a childhood nickname, Little Boots, or Caligula. And Caligula, or Little Boots, was a reference to his father Germanicus. Germanicus took the young Gaius on his military campaigns, and Germanicus had Gaius dressed the part of a soldier, of a legionnaire, which included a miniature sword, miniature helmet, miniature shield, and of course miniature soldier boots. Now, the nickname was used as an insult, and is still used as an insult to the Emperor Gaius. But during his lifetime, it was never used in his presence, and it wasn't really widely. He wasn't widely called Caligula until after his death. Now, Gaius's rule is described as a period of profligate expenditure and a general reign of terror. And these are hostile pro-senatorial sources writing against what they perceived as the madness of Gaius's rule. It had been reported that he entertained himself by watching people being tortured, that he whispered to his wife how much he liked her neck, but he was always captioned that by saying that he could have her strangled at any time. He is reported to have boasted that he did not care about his popularity as long as he was feared. Gaius was also a fan of horse and chariot racing, and these were the 2 most popular recreational sports in the Roman world. Gaius had a favorite horse, Incitatus, and Incitatus roughly translates to speedy. To show his love of his horse, he had a marble stable constructed for Incitatus. On race days, he would station troops around the hippodrome to ensure that no one disturbed his horse. Gaius was even rumored to have planned to have his horse, Incitatus, named to the consulship. Now, Gaius's reign was short. He was murdered not long after his ascension by his own bodyguards, and his reputation and memory of him has largely been shaped by sources that are hostile to Gaius and his dynasty, the Julio-Claudians. He is often portrayed or presented by subsequent historians as the poster child for the flaws of Augustus' settlement, namely the principle of hereditary succession. Now, Gaius' death put the Augustan settlement in a bind. When he died, he had no sons of his own to succeed him, and he had no clear-cut successors. The Senate debated the situation, and thoughts quickly gravitated within the Senate towards restoring the true republic. Now, while the Senate was debating, the imperial guard were ransacking the palace when they stumbled upon an imperial dynast, what we would call as a royal or an imperial prince, Claudius, hiding. Claudius was the uncle of Gaius, but he was kept hidden from public view during the reigns of Augustus and Tiberius and Gaius. Claudius had a number of physical impairments. He had a speech impediment. He was regarded as a very lackluster candidate for the dynasty. Now, the guards realized they could have risked themselves even further if they put an emperor on the throne and had the emperor in their pocket. So they immediately proclaimed Claudius emperors. Now, this event underscored how weak the Senate had become as an institution and how strong the army, namely the imperial guards, the Praetorian guards, had become as an institution. Claudius had a complicated personal life. He went through a number of wives and wound up marrying a niece of his. Claudius ruled for quite a bit of time, and he proved himself a very capable emperor. During his reign, he constructed a new harbor at Ostia, and Ostia is the port of Rome. He had a major aqueduct built, and he oversaw the Roman conquest of Britain. And this was done to tie his legacy to that of Julius Caesar's. And this was a very Augustan show of propaganda by him. Now, Claudius was succeeded by his stepson, Nero. Now, Nero, like Gaius, ascended to the throne as a teenager. Nero's early reign was relatively stable, and by all accounts, under the stewardship of the philosopher Seneca, things look to be on the up and up for the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Now, Nero eventually grew tired of the influence of Seneca and his supporters. He eventually orchestrated the removal of Seneca from power, and then he forced Seneca to commit suicide. Now, Nero's reign is also described as a period of terror and debauchery. Nero's reign is remembered best for the culling of the imperial family. He intentionally went out of his way to kill his own family members in an effort to ensure that he had no rivals. He is thought to have assassinated Claudius by poisoning the mushrooms that Claudius regularly ate. And he's thought to have done this with his mother's assistance. He's rumored to have killed his brother, an aunt of his stepson, a number of male relatives, and even implicated in the murder of his mother. Now, the plot to kill his mother involves a lot of wacky misadventures, including 3 failed poisonings, an attempt to have the ceiling of her bedroom collapse and fall on her, and a failed drowning before she was murdered by one of his servants. Nero is also rumored to have killed his wife along with his stepsister, and he is reported to have wandered the streets of Rome in disguise at night, mugging or killing random Romans simply for the joy of it. Now, in 68 BCE, Nero too was murdered by one of his slaves. And his legacy, the legacy of Nero, was shaped and still is largely shaped by the contemporary sources that were hostile to him. It should be noted that upon the deaths of Gaius and Nero, the people of Rome themselves, they expressed genuine public grief at the death of their Caesars because these Caesars were so young. There's no contemporary evidence really to suggest that the people of Rome themselves greatly disliked or despised Gaius or Nero. The negative opinions were shaped by writers who were pro-senatorial and anti-Julio-Claudian, anti-imperial dynasties. Now, the end of the first imperial dynasty, the end of the Julio-Claudians, created an interesting crisis in Roman politics. The principles of succession was established, with the nearest male relative. Nero culled the imperial dynasty to the point that no such heir could be located. Nero periodically made overtures saying that I wish I had a family member, I wish I had someone to share the joys and the burdens of ruling with, and whenever somebody came forward, he would have that person killed. He routinely did it. Nobody who could boast of a claim came forward. So when he died, there was this real situation in which we had no Caesars left. Now, the Senate thought that the situation was fine, that with no emperor, the old republic will be restored, and with it, their old status. Now, they were sadly mistaken. The people had grown accustomed to the Caesars, and it wasn't long after that strong men began to aspire to the imperial office. And this was their opportunity. They marshaled their resources and they went to war against one another to press their claim. Now, the year 69 is known as the year of the four emperors, after the four claimants to the imperial throne. Now, the eventual winner of this imperial contest was a man named Vespasian. Vespasian would go on to establish the second imperial dynasty of Rome, the Flavian dynasty. Now, Vespasian, he ruled wisely. He lived modestly and he built public works. He very much lived up to the Augustan principles. Now, Vespasian also ended the Principate phase of the Roman Empire, the phase of Augustus in which the old trappings of the Republic were put on public display and the imperial family was presented as a senatorial family, not a dynastic family. Vespasian initiated the dominant phase of the Roman Empire. From this point on, there will be no hiding the fact that the old republic was dead, that the emperor was in full control, and that Rome had only one master. That's the dominant phase. That's what Vespasian institutes. He removes the veil from the position of Augustus' settlement. Now, Vespasian had two sons, Titus, and Titus was one, and Titus had already proved himself to be a capable commander and administrator, and his younger son Domitian. Vespasian was succeeded by Titus in a very smooth transfer of power, and during the reign of Titus, the Flavian Amphitheater, better known as the Roman Colosseum, was built. Mount Vesuvius erupted during Titus' reign. This would be the event that buried Pompey and Herculaneum. And Titus, he was regarded as a very popular and a very capable ruler, but tragically he died prematurely. He was succeeded by his younger brother Domitian, and Domitian was regarded as a bad emperor. He is reported to have terrorized senators. He put many to death. He is reputed to have hosted a group of senators at a dinner called the Feast of Death, a macabre event in which he served dishes off of black plates, used black drapes, provided black silverware, and each senator's place was marked by a miniature grave marker. Now, the senators were terrified, and they were sure they were going to be killed during the course of the evening. When the meal ended, they were simply sent home, and Domitian, it was said, spent hours every day catching flies and impaling them on pins. The Black Dinner was a true event. The impaling flies is a mystery to us. It's clearly meant to illustrate that he lacked mental restraint, focus, and that he had a sort of psychopathic nature. But again, that story can't be proven. And again, that was written and that was presented by a source hostile to Domitian. So we can't say with certainty that these acts were true. But Domitian, his reign came to a crashing end in 96, in the year 96, when he was killed when he was assassinated by one of his own guardsmen. Now, Domitian's death ended the Flavian dynasty, and once again, emperorless, the Roman people opted not to restore the Roman Republic. The emperors had become ingrained in everyday life. The Republic was dead, the empire was full alive, and there was there would now always be a need to fill the imperial vacancy. Now, the failures of the hereditary lines led the Romans to adopt a new succession principle. The next emperors would reflect this. This period is a very rare example of the Romans breaking with traditions and adopting a new social policy. The emperors would pick their successors based on that person's qualities, adopting their successors. Now, this policy allowed the Romans to enjoy their most powerful period and a sustained internal accord. The next series of leaders are known as the five good emperors, and their period is known as the high point of the Roman Empire. Rome was prosperous, the empire boundaries were at their greatest extent, and the emperors were all conscientious rulers. The empire now contained 50 provinces and is estimated to have had a population of somewhere around 50 million people. The Roman Empire stretched from the Iberian Peninsula in the west to Mesopotamia in the east, from the North Sea all the way to the deserts of North Africa in the south. Those were the four cardinal direction boundaries of the Roman Empire. The first of the five good emperors, or the Antonine dynasty, as it's also known, was an old man at its ascension. His successor was a younger man. His successor was a man named Trajan. And Trajan had the notable distinction of being the first emperor who was not from the Italian peninsula. Trajan was from Hispania. And it's also remarkable because Hispania was really the first overseas province of the Romans that the Romans incorporated. And they spent a great deal of time Latinizing or Romanizing the peoples of Hispania. Now, Trajan, during his career and his ascension, he represents the shift of imperial power out of Rome proper and out of the Italian peninsula into the empire as embodied by the provinces. This change was also reflected in the Senate's composition, as a number of senators were now not of Roman or Italic descent, but had family roots in the provinces. This was the true success of Rome. The true success of Rome was not the army. It was not marching out there and engaging in all these wars. The true success of Rome was in Romanizing the people of the empires. When we spoke of the Hellenistic period, the great failure of the Hellenistic dynasties, of the Hellenistic kingdoms, was that Greek culture was overlaid in the cities only. It never permeated, it never caught on in the countryside. Greek never became the lingua franca of these Hellenistic kingdoms. Greek never displaced ancient Egyptian. Greek never displaced Aramaic as the working language of these areas. Greek culture did not displace the culture that emanated from Babylon, this original Mesopotamian culture, this Sumerian Akkadian culture. It did not displace that culture. It did not do any of that stuff. Greek culture of the Hellenistic kingdoms was limited to the cities, and learning Greek was only limited to those who wanted to rise in the imperial apparatuses of these Macedonian aristocratic dynasts who ruled those Hellenistic kingdoms. The Romans, they were successful in tying local populations, local elites, and local common peoples of the various regions, of the various provinces of the empire, to the ideas and the identity of Rome. We will discuss Romanization of the provinces at a later date, but this was their true success, and this is what made Rome so popular, not so popular, but so endearing, so enduring. Even now, you will find fragments of Roman civilization in their provinces. Aqueducts and so forth, and forms of government, but also the Roman importance of bathing. One of the cardinal virtues of Islamic civilization in the Eastern Mediterranean remains bathing. The public bath was one of the more enjoyable social features of the Roman world. That can be traced directly to a Roman influence. Water, as we know, is very scarce in the desert, and most people in the desert don't really waste their time bathing, because the water is needed for for drinking and for flocks and herds and whatnot. Now back to Trajan. Trajan had a very distinguished career before his reign. He was a sober man, remembered fondly by senatorial sources for his respect and his courtesy that he showed to the Senate. We can read in there that men like Domitian and Nero did not show respect or courtesy to the Senate, which is why they're remembered unfavorably. Now, Trajan was a military man, and under him the Romans invaded and conquered the ancient region of Dacia, an area in Eastern Europe enclosed by the Danube River. Now, the conquest of Dacia allowed Trajan to design the empire boundaries more favorably to Rome. Trajan also fought against the Parthians, the Iranian group that had defeated Crassus. He won a few temporary victories against the Parthians, gaining Mesopotamia for a while. Trajan also benefited from the Dacian conquest by gaining access to some of the very lucrative gold mines that were in Dacia. Now, the wealth generated from these new gold mines allowed Trajan to build a new harbor at Ostia for the city of Rome. Now, Trajan also built a huge complex, the Forum of Trajan, next to the Roman Forum. This area was built, that structure was built using the finest imported marble and decorative stone. Next to this was his memorial, his great memorial known as Trajan's Column. Now, Trajan's Column celebrated his victory over the Dacians. He built a Latin library and a Greek library next to his column. Trajan acquired the title Optimus Princeps, which literally means just the best of the princes, the best of the first citizens, the best of the princepses. He was regarded as being in a separate class with Augustus, had the very best of emperors. Later emperors would be acclaimed as Felicor Augusto Melicor Traiano, which roughly translates to luckier than Augustus, better than Trajan. The Senate had a reverse saying for emperors that they did not like. It went somewhere along the line of crueler than Domitian, filthier or more disgusting than Nero, which illustrated again how much those two emperors were disliked by their senatorial sources. Now, Trajan selected a man named Hadrian as his heir, and Hadrian was another good choice. He had a respectable career before being adopted by Trajan. Hadrian, unlike Trajan, did not embark on any military campaigns. He was a patron of the arts. He was a Philhellene, and Hadrian's reign also hinted at the empire really being too large for one man to effectively rule. Communication and control issues popped up regularly for Hadrian. Hadrian's solution was to visit every province of the empire one by one, and it took many years to do. He traveled with a mobile court who visited the provinces too. Hadrian was also a builder like his imperial predecessors, and he had the Pantheon constructed in Rome. Outside of Rome, he built a villa for himself at Tivoli that contained various rooms and structures designed to resemble palaces, and not palaces, but places that he had seen on his great imperial progress. Now, Hadrian built a low-scale wall on the borders of a province in Britain. Hadrian's Wall still stands today. And lastly, he renamed the sea on the east coast of Italy after himself. We know the sea had the Adriatic Sea. Now, Hadrian's successor, Antonius Pius, was a sound choice. He was a good administrator, but he's not one who stands out among his contemporaries. Historians generally view him as a caretaker of the empire rather than an impressive ruler in his own right, like his predecessors. I think that's a bit discourteous to Antonius Pius. He faced many of the same problems that his imperial predecessors faced, and he solved them in his own manner. The empire did not fall under his watch. he put out some very sound reforms, and he lived up to the great ideals that the five good emperors, that his predecessors, the three good emperors up until him, had put out, and so I feel that it's a bit harsh to call him to view him solely as a caretaker, but he is credited with keeping the empire running smoothly. Now, Antonius Pius' successor was Marcus Aurelius. And Marcus Aurelius is really touted at the last of the five good emperors. He is sometimes called the philosopher king or the philosopher emperor because of his book, The Meditations. The Meditations discusses virtues and righteousness and the merits of righteous living. Now, Marcus Aurelius' reign introduced a number of new threats to the Roman world, namely the arrival of new Germanic and Iranian tribes, the Marcomanni, and of course the Iranian Sarmatians. Now, both moved in next door to the Roman Empire boundaries. And even worse, during his reign was an outbreak of plague, which undermined imperial stability throughout the provinces. Now, Marcus Aurelius' reign is also notable for the long periods of war against the Germanic tribes. He waged war for most of his reign. He died on campaign, and at the end of it, the Romans had very little to show for his war efforts. He died. When he died, he broke with the imperial adoption policy. He named his son Commodus as his heir. Now, Commodus became emperor in the year 180, and very soon showed himself to be what we regard as a spoiled child of privilege, with delusions of godhood, and that is a direct quote, not a direct quote, but it is a reflection of how his contemporaries viewed him. He's remembered in one of the more eye-popping hostile manners of the Roman emperors. Commodus thought that he was a Herculean-like figure. He paraded around at palaces wearing a lion skin, just like the Greek hero. Commodus also thought of himself as an expert warrior, and he frequently fought as a gladiator in public. Gladiators were typically slaves, but in rare instances, freemen or Roman citizens fought in the gladiator contest. There was much prestige in being a gladiator, with successful gladiators being the equivalent of pro wrestlers or pro football players today. Commodus wanted that prestige. He fought in allegedly rigged or staged matches. The sources hostile to him all state that he terrorized and humiliated senators, which all bad emperors, have you been tracking by now, do. The period of the five good emperors stretches from 96 to the year 96 to 180. It was a period of prudent leadership and stability. The five good emperors, over the period of their reign, over the 84-year period, provided Rome with the stability and the internal accord to allow the Romans to reach the heights of their empire while flourishing culturally. Now, the next emperor, the emperor who came to the throne after Commodus' death, and Commodus, of course, had the bad all emperors where he was assassinated by one of his bodyguards. The next emperor was immediately murdered by the Praetorian Guard, which resulted in one of the more shameful moments in Roman history. The death of the emperor left the Praetorian Guards in control of Rome, yet again taking advantage of the opportunity like they had after Gaius' death. The Praetorian Guard decided to sell the office of emperor to the highest bidder. This instance reveals the reality of power in Rome. The Praetorian Guard had the power to make or break emperors. As the order of Augustus broke down and more aspiring emperors turned to the army to gain power, the winner of the Praetorian auction was a man named Didius Julianus, and he promised the guardsmen some 2,500 Roman sesterces. he offered them that a piece, and that sum was the equivalent of 25 years' salary, with a very nice bonus for a Roman soldier. Shortly thereafter, his ascension, Julianus was murdered as well. Now, at this point, order broke down in the provinces. There was a real big breakdown throughout the Roman provinces. The Roman world was splintering. The provincial legions posted in Britain, Syria, and the Danube and the Rhine provinces, they all decided to rebel, and they proclaimed their local provincial governors as emperors. And these new emperors all raced to Rome to fight it out and make good on their claim. Yet another Roman civil war was erupting. Now, the governor of the Danube region was the eventual winner of these wars, and he succeeded as the emperor Septimius Severus. Now, Severus was the first of the soldier emperors, and these men gained their imperial titles by martial conquest and not adoption. They very simply commanded the best troops, or they simply fought the best. They were typically provincial governors of frontier provinces, which faced barbarian threats daily. The Roman frontier provinces were assigned large armies for security. Now, Severus was from the town of Leptis Magna in North Africa, an old Carthaginian settlement. Now, he is the first African emperor of the Roman Empire. Not a black African, but just an African in the terms of being born in Africa. And there was another important mark showing how power was shifting out away from Rome and away from the Italic peoples. Power had already shifted with the reign of Trajan, but you can now see that that Roman identity is not limited to the city of Rome. That the idea of being Roman has expanded, and it has been exported and taken up by the people of the provinces. Throughout the history of the Hellenistic kingdoms, nobody from the countryside of any of these regions that they lived in thought of themselves as Macedonian or Greek, or headlong dived into supporting these regimes and rising within the bureaucratic apparatuses of these regimes. All right, now Severus stabilized the situation in Rome, and he ruled effectively from the year 193 to 211. Now, Severus was a military man, and he was a very practical man, and he is rumored to have told his son on his deathbed, "Enrich the soldiers, despise everybody else." Very shrewd and pragmatic advice from an emperor, from a father to a son. Now, from this point on, emperors will mostly gain power by brute force. Internal and external problems will multiply, and the Roman Empire will now begin its very long decline until it collapses in Western Europe and North Africa. And with that, we will break here, and when we come back, we will examine the course of events for the Roman Empire after the reign of Septimius Severus. As always, hit like, subscribe, and comment, and let me know what you thought about this lecture. I am Ted, and I'll see you guys next time for another lecture.